Welcome to session on the working capital management in the large companies. In fact, in the last class, we discussed about the working capital management of the small and medium enterprises. Today, we'll be talking about the working capital management in the big corporations. Now, see, it has always been an effort for all the companies to keep their working capital positive. So when I'm talking about a positive working capital, it is basically I'm referring to the net working capital. That is the current asset minus the current liability. So obviously the gross working capital will always be positive, but when I'm talking about maintaining working capital at a positive level, meaning that we're referring to the net working capital. So that is the current assets are in excess of the current liability. Now that is what actually shows the financial health. I mean the liquidity position of an organization when it has a positive working capital. However, and there are ratios like you have current ratios, you have quick ratios, you have cash ratios, which measure the various kinds of liquidity position of an organization. Now, the point is, see, one thing is to have a positive working capital, and the second is if you have a very high level of working capital. For example, the thumb rule may not be true for all firms, but the thumb rule says that the current asset to current liability ratio should be around 2:1. Now there are also, it depends on the industry. In some industry it is very high, as high as let us say 4:1, whereas in some industry it is also 1:1. Now the point is, suppose let us assume that the norm is 2:1. Now the point is, if you have that means if you have 100 rupee in current asset, I mean sorry, current liability, you will be having 200 rupees in the current assets. So then your ratio will be maintained at a 2:1. But the point is, now if I maintain my current asset at let's say 400 rupee, 500 rupee, my working capital ratio, I mean the current ratio will be very high. Now if 2:1 is the norm, then more than that should be very good. But a very high level of working capital does not always mean that the company is actually doing well. In fact, if you have very high level of working capital, you can always signal that your company is having excess amount of cash. Okay, and we all know that cash is the most ideal of all current assets. Because cash as it is, if you keep it with yourself, it will not generate any amount. To be able to earn some return on your cash, you will have to invest the cash elsewhere, like in a security, or you have to use the cash in stocks, in goods, so, and these kind of things, which will turn over and give you a rate of return. Now, if you are having too much of cash, or for that matter, if you are having whatever is the required level of inventory, you are having more than that level of inventory, you can end up having very high current asset. Now, meaning that in current asset you have cash, you have inventory, and you have debtors. If you have excess of all these three things, then you will have a very high working capital. See, but the high working capital might mean that the company is safe. I mean, the credit worthiness is high. The company can pay the bills at time, but it does not always mean that the company is performing really well, because you are probably in the run to have high amount of liquidity. You are compromising on your development possibilities, because in order to grow, in order to develop, you have to grow, and in order to grow, you need to invest in appropriate projects. Now, to invest in appropriate projects, you need cash, and a company which is growing is perpetually in, need of cash. Now, why a company is able to maintain high amount of working capital is because probably the company is not investing in good projects, or not seeking out good projects for which the company has idle cash left, so it is staying idle with the company. So you are probably sacrificing development in the favor of liquidity. So that's a very bad thing for any organization. Similarly, you have excessively high net working capital. It will indicate that the company has invested more than what is required in inventory, So your inventory is very high, making the current assets very high. Now you are collecting your debts, I mean your debtors are very high. Why will your debtors be very high? Because you have sold on credit basis, but you are not bothered about collection, so your debtor are building up. So all these things, high level of debtors, high level of cash, high level of inventory, all these are diminishing your profitability, diminishing your revenue, and in effect they're diminishing your operational efficiency. Large corporations, most of the time they fall prey to these things, like maintaining excess of these current assets is what most of the large companies you will see, and this is very peculiar. If you look at the steel plants, they are very prone to these kind of things, like especially the inventory buildup in mining companies as well as in the steel plants. This is typically high. Now, there could also be a scenario where you will have negative working capital. Now, it might look surprising that the company can still operate with a negative working capital. By the way, when can we have negative working capital? We can have negative working capital when my current liabilities are in excess of current assets. Now, what do you think? Which companies can afford to operate like that? These are actually big firms with a great brand recognition. That means you are on the top of your game in the market segment. So, your products are liked by the clients. Even if you have no, advertising for your products, but your clients are loyal, they will anyhow buy your product, so you have built up your brand like that. So you have a very strong selling power. So only these are the kind of companies which can, and you are at the top of your competition. So these are the companies which many times you can see these businesses will have negative working capital. Now see why you can have afford to have negative working capital, because whenever required, suppose you don't have cash. When can you have negative working capital? Suppose you don't have cash. Now, if you don't have cash, there is every possibility that you will run into credit problems, because a bill is raised against you and you are not able to pay the bill, so your credit worthiness will suffer. But they are confident that they can raise capital at a very short notice from either from their other operations of the business, or from bank loans, or from other sources. So they have cash available elsewhere in the business, or they have very good ties with the bank, so they can immediately arrange for cash whenever it is required. Even if their assets are locked up in the various kinds of long-term assets or equipments, they can quickly satisfy these short-term expenses by arranging for funds from other business operations or from banks or such kind. So this is what allows this kind of companies to remain solvent. Had any other, let us say, struggling firm operated with this, it is not simply feasible or viable for a small corporation or a medium corporation to operate with a negative working capital. But large corporations do that because they have a strong selling power and great brand recognition. Now the point is, these are the two typical problems that we encounter in large corporations. One, the buildup of a huge amount of current asset leading to operational inefficiency. On the other hand, you have this, for example, force your suppliers to give you credit beyond what he can do. So when you have this huge amount of competitive power, then you can operate with it, and both of these things that we know are problematic. So today's session is devoted to that, is why the working capital management that should be done in a large corporation. Now you see, we all have been discussing working capital management for quite a some period now. Now you see, we all know what are the subcomponents of working capital. Working capital management, it is the collection of activities that a firm does in order to cover the day-to-day operational expenses. The finance is used for the day-to-day expenses. These are all recurring expenses, regular expenses that are happening on a day-to-day basis. And this working capital management also ensures that your company's existence is protected. That means you are viable on a day-to-day basis, and you will continue to operate as a going concern. So this is the lookout of the working capital management, and it is very critical for business organizations, whether you are medium, small, or big. It is very critical, but it is more critical because of the two reasons we discussed. Is more critical for the big organizations. Now the working capital has various subcomponents, but you see the large corporations, there are all kinds of finance functions happening. The working capital probably is the only function that takes up the huge amount of managerial time. Now, of the total amount of managerial time, probably 70 to 80% of the time is devoted in appropriate working capital management, so that the farm remains efficient on a going concern level. So when we're talking about the sub-components of working capital, I think we have discussed enough about it. Just as a recap, the working capital management and all these things are very, very applicable in the big corporations. You have the liquidity management part. Basically, where liquidity management, we mean the cash and the marketable securities, the management of that. You have the accounts receivable part, debtors management, then you have the inventory management, then you have the payables or the creditor management, and then you have the short term, the financing part, the short term debt, where from you will get the financing part. So the in case of short term SMEs, these problems are typical for SMEs, but all these functions are very critical for a large organization. So the subcomponents, we have already discussed most of the subcomponent. In today's class, we'll basically try to focus on the various sources of finance available for a large corporation, among other things. Now you see, why is a working capital significant for the corporation? Because the manager of working capital is responsible for maintaining a good balance between all these components. These components we saw now, the 5 components of liquidity of the cash or debtors, creditors, inventory, and the short-term financing. So the finance manager's job is to maintain a proper balance between all these components. So if all these components are interacting at a balance and interacting with each other in a good manner, without any friction, then you say that the working capital is efficient. Now you see, the majority of, as we discussed just now, the majority of a manager's time and effort is spent on this bringing of these current assets and liabilities to the acceptable level. Meaning that suppose there is a inventory build-up, okay, and suppose the level of inventory that should be maintained for smooth operation of a business is, let us say, 2,500 units, okay, and the farm is somehow at any point of time, if you go for a stock taking, it has been seen that on an average the farm is maintaining around 6,000 units. So it is the job of the working capital manager to bring this level down to 2,500 units, because 3,500 units are lying idle at any point of time. And suppose the cost of the raw material per unit is 100 rupee, then 3,500 into 100 is 3,50,000 rupees at any point of time lying idle with your organization. This 3,500 could be used elsewhere to give you more operational efficiency, to give you more revenue. That is one thing if you have overstocking. Another thing is bringing it to acceptable level, meaning that suppose you have a daily requirement of cash of, let's say, 50,000 rupees, whereas you are maintaining only 30,000 rupees. So you frequently run into problems while paying bills. Okay, so realizing that, now the working capital manager will actually find out what should be the daily cash requirement, and he should bring that to the acceptable level of 50,000. So whenever there is an over operation, you bring it to the actual level, the required level, and when there is an under storage, that also you bring it to the acceptable level. That is the main job of the working capital manager. And because of that, as I said, these are all day-to-day activities. So every day the manager will spend a lot of time on these things. Like if you look at the finance manager's entire career, or if it is 100% of that 100% manager's career, probably assuming that he's busy in all these financial activities, So about 70 to 80% time he will devote to the working capital management. Only 5 to 7% time will go to the capital budgeting, because the capital budgeting of the capex or the capital investment decisions that happen once in 4 5 years. Okay, so very limited amount of time is devoted to that, and the rest of the time goes for your profit planning as well as other different kind of activities, financing, profit planning, this kind of activities. So the maximum amount of time is devoted to this working capital management, because at all points of time you have to monitor the current assets, and you have to see that at these current asset levels they keep on there is a tendency to go beyond the balance. That is either build up if you are not paying proper attention, or it will fall below the acceptable level if you are not paying. So you always have to be on the lookout for any changes in the balance that is happening. So there is a, that's a day to day job of the manager. Now, the business enterprises, they can also lower their financial cost while increasing the amount of money invested in short-term assets. Because you see, if you are maintaining at a very appropriate level, you are freeing up capital from the working capital. I mean the current assets, and those things could be more productively utilized. So you can have good rate of return out of that. Also, you can reduce your financial cost because of that. Now, see, because when we're talking about big businesses, the big businesses will have big working capital, okay, and they will achieve good working capital performance by what the big corporations have a tendency, they will squeeze the small suppliers with their purchasing power and market clout, and that leads to the problem on the part of the supplier or your creditor. Now the point is, that is why the working capital management of a big corporation to be balanced and to be efficient, it is utmost importance, because there are other parties also will be affected if your working capital management is not appropriate. So we talk about the various kinds of the financing available with the companies. Now we know the large companies. Now you see the in large companies you can talk about the at least there are so many kinds of finances available. Here I'm talking about only 7 sources. So you can if you browse, if you talk about the working capital finance, you can see a list of 15 to 18 source of finances, but here I'm talking about the only most popular 7 sources which the companies can tap to get the working capital finances. Now, and as you know, small SMEs, they have limited source, they can only tap to limited sources of these things, whereas the large corporations have access to all the sources. By virtue of their size, they have access to all these sources. So, and SMEs are mostly important in trade credit and short term bank loan, whereas the all the sources avenues are open for these large corporations. So we'll discuss few of them. We can talk about the trade credit. Now, what is a trade credit? As we have already discussed elsewhere regarding the trade credit. Now, trade credit is an automatic source of short-term finance, because in the due course of business, like you are purchasing things from your supplier on a credit basis, and it is a norm that you will always purchase things on credit basis. So the credit available from your supplier is a continuous line of credit. Okay, so it is automatically available. Similarly, you have laborers, you have other kinds of overheads, for such as, for example, direct labor. You have the employees who are working for yourself, for your company. Now you don't pay, suppose I work for today, I don't get my salary today, so I go on working for 30 35 days, then 30 days, and then after that I get my salary. So meaning that that is also a continuous line of credit available to the for 30 days to the corporation. So trade credit is an automatic source of finance. You don't have to arrange for this kind of finance. Now it is a in case of large corporations, it is a business to business agreement with your customer, where you can, I mean basically your supplier, where you can purchase goods without paying any cash upfront. So you just make a phone call that you need raw material to such and such quantity of raw material, and the supplier will send you the raw material. You don't have to pay anything upfront. Okay, you pay the supplier at a later schedule. Now the business, usually in India, the businesses operate with trade credit, where they give the buyers usually a 30-day or 60-day or maximum of 90-day of credit to pay. This is the norm in India. These norms vary from country to country. Now, these transactions are usually recorded through an invoice. Okay, so in order to keep track, these are always recorded through an invoice. Now, the trade credit is, in addition to being a automatic source of finance, it is also, zero cost. Okay, that is, suppose you are supposed to pay on first of a month and you are not able to pay on first of month, but you are deferring it for another 7 days, you don't pay any interest on that. This is a norm in the industry, that it's a zero cost financing. So it increases your company's assets while deferring the payment for a specified value of the goods or service in the future, and it requires you to not pay any interest till for this deferral period. So that is the reason why most of the companies, knowing that this is a zero cost source of finance, they try to delay these kind of payments. Okay, so that is the game most of the businesses play of delaying. So because suppose you pay salary on the first of month and your salary expenses in a month are, let us say, 1 crore. So if you delay for 3 days, then the 3 crore, 1 crore you are using for 3 days. So that's a source of finance. Now, similarly, the suppliers here, if you are stretching the credit period that is available to you, it is usually a disadvantage to you, to the supplier, because his line of credit is open. So if he doesn't receive the cash on first of the month, then for another 3 days, how will he manage? He will have to arrange sources from other place, which will cost him. So this is a particular disadvantage, though it is advantageous to the organization, the big company, but it is disadvantageous to the supplier. And obviously the big company will have a motivation to always stretch the credit period. Okay, so this is the problem with the trade credit. Now you see, you can, if you look at the various pros and cons of the trade credit, you see, in under the pros you can talk about the, it is cost effective, zero cost, so it is cost effective. Now it improves your cash flow for the buyers, obviously, because you are not paying any upfront payment. Now it will encourage higher sales volume for the sellers. Okay, so you see, the if you are on the selling side and you are selling on credit, then obviously you will the trade credit will attract more number of buyers. It will lead to strong relationship and customer loyalty as far as the seller is concerned. Whereas if you look at the cons, then the high cost of buyers if payment are not made on time. Okay, so if you are stretching, the cost is, for you it is low, zero cost, but for it is going to be costly for your supplier. Now the late payments or the bad debts can negatively impact a buyer's credit profile and your relationship with the supplier. Now suppose you are supposed to pay on 90th day, and one cycle you stretch it for 5 days, the next cycle you stretch it for 10 days, the next cycle you stretch it for 17 days. So the supplier knows that you are purposefully stretching the credit period. So you will lose out on the credit worthiness in the marketplace. So next time you approach the supplier for credit, he might not grant you credit. Even if you're a big corporation, he would not like to deal with you and take up the cost of the credit himself. The sellers run the risk of the buyers not paying the debt. Suppose you 90-day credit has been stretched till 100-day and still there is no payment. So there is every possibility that it will turn into bad debt. The late payments will also put a stress on, the strain on your balance sheet if you are the seller of the good. Now, in the next source, we could talk about the cash credit, wherein the this is a short-term financing solution. Cash credit and overdraft are very similar kind of things. Now, it's a short-term financing solution that your business customer has at his disposal. Now there is arrangement between the client and the bank, okay, regarding this cash credit. Now what the client does is, when he doesn't have enough funds in their account, they will use the cash credit for the routine banking transactions up to the credit limit. Okay, so you sanction a credit limit, and whenever he requires that, so even if suppose he has issued a check of, let us say, 10 lakhs. Now the balance in the account shows it is only 9 lakh 20. So, but the bank will still honor the 10 lakh check even if the fund is not available, because it is well within the cash credit limit of your client. Okay, so see, unlike your different other credit products, interest is only charged on the daily balance. In case of overdraft, the entire margin, this thing is charged, whereas in case of, it is only charged for the daily closing balance. So see, it typically offers you higher overdraft limit, and has in real sense it will have smaller interest cost on the borrowed fund, as compared to your overdraft, because the penalty fees are not triggered for using the account, this particular account. Now see, there are another method of that is called a purchase of the discounting of bills. Basically, we know it by the name of the discounting of bills. Now, bill purchase in the trade finance, it involves a transaction where the bank or the institution buys the bill, or basically the invoice which has been converted into a bill, or that is also a promissory note from the seller before its maturity date at a discounted value. Now you see, there are two terms here I'm using. One is a purchase, the other one is a discount. Okay, what happens in a purchase is, you buy the, you buy the this thing, the bill from the client. Okay, so suppose I am the client, I have a banker, SBI is the banker, and let us say I have a bill. Now I will sell the bill to my banker, and the banker, suppose the bill is worth 5 lakh rupees. Now I'll sell the bill to the banker. Now banker will not actually give me 5 lakh, but he will give me a discounted value, suppose a 2% discount or 3% discount on the 5 lakh rupees. He will pay me the cash immediately. So I don't have to wait for 90 days to get 5 lakh, but I get 2% or 3% lesser than 5 lakh rupees. Let us say before 90 days, or before 85 days, or before 86 days. Now the very purpose of your bill purchase is to provide immediate liquidity to your seller, because now this, if I'm the seller, I would have to, otherwise in absence of this kind of arrangement, I would have to wait for 90 days to get my 5 lakh rupees. Now it is, the life is very smooth, because today I got the bill, and today itself I sold my bill to the bank. The bank purchased my bill and immediately gave me. So today itself I avail, let us say, hypothetically speaking, let us say I get 4 lakh 90 rupees today itself. So then I'm happy that I got the liquidity that I needed. Now, so the point is, this is the example of a purchase. Now, what happens in case of a bills discounting is that it is a again a trade finance, where the bank or the financial institutions, they provide funds to the holder of the bill before the due date. Okay, and then what happens is that the drawer submits the bill to the bank, and in return the bank pays the drawer the bill's face value minus the discount. Now here the arrangements are similar. In the first case, the banker owns the bill. In case of the purchasing of bills, the banker owns the bill from the day one. Whereas in case of discounting of bills, the bill is still owned by the client or the seller of the product, but it is discounted by the bank. The seller's bank. It is discounted by the seller's bank, and the seller's bank gives him the required liquidity, and on the maturity of the bill, it will be presented to the buyer of the product, and he will remit the funds to the bank. Now the point is the working of the purchase of bills and discount of bills are most similar, but the only difference is the ownership of the bill. In the purchase it lies with the banker, and in case of this thing, the bill still belongs to the seller. You can talk about something like a letter of credit. Now see, letter of credit, these are basically used in case of international transactions. Now if you are export or import firm, then these kind of instruments are mostly relevant. Now the letter of credit, this is a document that is sent from a bank or financial institution that guarantees that the seller, that means suppose I am the seller, that guarantees that I will receive the I will make the buyer's payment, or I will receive the buyer's payment on time, on the full amount. For example, suppose I am an exporter, so I need guarantee that the party who has purchased from me, he will pay me on time, and the banker to the buyer will give me that guarantee, that is a letter of credit. Or for that matter, if I am an importing firm and I am buying from another country, then I need to remit the funds, let us say 90 days after this. Now the seller in the abroad, he requires a guarantee that I will make a payment after 90 days, because see the rules and regulations and laws and in different countries are different. So the point is, so he needs a guarantee, and who will give that guarantee? My banker will give the guarantee in the form of a letter of credit to the to the seller in the other country. Now these letters of credits are, these are often used by in international trade. Just now, like we discussed, these are very popular in case of international trade. Now you can have so many types of letter of credit. Now the banks issue this kind of letter of credit with clients who have a continuous business operation with the banks. There could be several types of letter of credit. You can have a commercial letter of credit. You can have a standby letter of credit, which will only be used. Suppose standby letter of credits are not given by the banks, the sellers or the buyer's bank directly, but by another bank, which is not the involved parties bank. These are called the standby letter of credit. You can have travelers letter of credit. You can have revolving letter of credit, wherein there is a continuous requirement. Continuously there is the letter of credit stands guaranteed for a continuous flow of credit. Now the why the banks take guarantee and why the banks issue this kind of letter of credit is because they will collect a fee for this issuing this kind of. So this is the bank's income for issuing letter of credit. Now obviously, if the bank is taking guarantee for another party, now the banks will only do so if they are satisfied with your credit worthiness and they have evaluated your financial standing, your financial health, and they have a long-term association with your organization. Then only the banks will. Otherwise, if you have never transacted with a bank and you just walk into the bank and ask them that I need a letter of credit, it might not be available to you. So they will assess your financial position, and then they can issue a letter of credit for a fee. Well, there are advantages and disadvantages of letter of credit. Like you can, under advantages, you can create the security, and you can build mutual trust between the buyers and sellers in trade transactions, because you see, this is happening between one country and the other country. If you are based in the same country, then obviously the building of this mutual trust could be easy. But if you are operating in two different countries, then building of the mutual trust is a bit difficult. So this letter of credit helps you in that. It makes it easier to define the various specifications of basically when and how the transactions will be completed between two involved parties. Like the letter of credit talks about the modes of the transaction and the dates of the transactions. The letter of credit, it can also be personalized to your specific requirement. It can be tailored to the circumstances of each transaction. That can be negotiated with the bank, and you can have a tailor-made letter of credit. You can make the transfer of funds more efficient and streamlined through the letter of credit. So basically, letter of credit is an additional guarantee that to your track record of your business. It's an additional guarantee that yes, this party is financially safe and sound and will pay on time. See, your financial background is there to see for everybody because you have financial statements which are available in the public domain. Now, a party must have gone through that, but letter of credit is an additional guarantee to that. That yes, this party is having good credit worthiness because the banker issued the letter of credit. Then you can talk about the disadvantages. In disadvantages, you can have the buyers will typically bear the cost of obtaining the letter of credit. Okay, now because I am the buyer, right? In a transaction, there is a seller and the buyer. The seller requires now because I'm the buyer, I have to pay money. Now I am deferring that payment for 90 days. Now the seller would want that the buyer should give me present with me letter of credit. So the cost of the letter of credit is transferred to the buyer here. Now the letter of credit it may not cover every detail of the transaction. For example, the exact date on which the payment will be made, let us say where will the delivery take place and all these things. So there could be, it is not that exhaustive. So you potentially leave a room for some kind of a margin for error. You by establishing a letter of credit quite tedious and quite be time consuming for all the parties involved both the buyer and the seller. Now, the terms of letter of credit may not account for various unexpected changes in the political or economic landscape. Okay, so yes, letter of credit stands guarantee under normal circumstances, but when the normal circumstances are violated, then letter of credit cannot give you any guarantee. Okay, if there are political turmoil, there are economic changes, then it may not be a good guarantee. We can talk about the various bank guarantees and undertakings. Now, you might have come across a scenario where you ask for a loan from a bank and the bank asks you to get a guarantor for you. So basically, it's the same kind of arrangement. Now, in the bank guarantee, it is a promise by a financial institution to meet the liabilities of a business or individual if they fail to fulfill their obligations in a contractual transaction. Now, for example, if I'm asking for a loan and the bank is asking for a guarantor, it means that if I default on my loan, the interest payment and principal repayment, then they will catch hold of the guarantor and probably try to recover things from him. Now, this is similar for any business where they stand guarantee for a business house that the business house will make all the payments, all the contractual payments on time. If they don't do so, then probably the guarantor will be in problem. Now, the bank guarantees are mostly seen in international business transactions here also, although they may also there may be also individuals who need guarantee to rent property in some countries. Okay, just like we were talking about right now, the personal requirements. Now, different types of guarantees could be there. For example, there could be a performance bond guarantee, there could be an advance payment guarantee, there could be a warranty bond guarantee, that could be a rental guarantee that you will make these payments on time. Now, see, the bank guarantees, they are also called as the standby letter of credit. Now, we discussed that in case of letter of credit, there's a standby letter of credit which comes into picture by not the client's own bank but another bank. So, this is a bank which is giving you guarantee that this is bank guarantee and letter of credit. The standby letter of credit, they operate in a similar fashion. Now, bank guarantees from a very reputable institution also. Now, see, for example, if I'm a small party, not known in the big business circle, but I have a very big bank's guarantee, then this will definitely establish my business. To establish relationships for my business. It will increase access to cash flow, to capital. It will set up various business opportunities for me. It will protect my business from losses. So bank guarantee can help us in many ways. Then you talk about something called a factoring. In a factoring, factoring is a service available in India as well as other countries. Now, what is this factoring? Before I go to a factoring, which is a factor? Now, factor is basically a company who provides funds. Okay, it's a funding source. Now, how does it operate? Now, it agrees to pay the company the value of an invoice less the discount for commission and fees. So that's quite similar to the kind of bills discounting. Now, the suppose I'm a big corporation and every day I'm making sales of various amounts. So the company's collection department will always be on toes to collect the. Instead of that, what I can do is I can transfer these particular activities to a factor. Now, what will the factor do? The factor business, the large companies will focus on their core competency, whereas the collection of these bills will be taken up by a factor. Now, the factor will take up all these invoices or the bills, and immediately for each bill. So every day the invoices or the bills are being generated, and the factor will keep on transferring liquid cash against each of these bills to the company. Now, because this companies they specializes in accounts receivable or financing, or basically this is all known as factoring is also called as this accounts receivable financing. So you are providing finance against the bills receivable or against the invoice. Now the point is that you get these invoices from the company, so you boost their cash flow, you give them liquidity. Now the business in the position of waiting for 30 to 90 days for its customer to pay invoices will have to no more wait for that. So they will work in a so the factoring company will take up that particular asset. Now the bill. Now the point is, what if the buyer of the goods don't make the payments? Now the factoring, that is why in India could be of two types. You can have a recourse factoring, you could have a non-recourse factoring. Now in case of a non-recourse factoring, what will happen is, suppose the factor has taken up the bill for, let us say, a buyer who is, let us say, Mr. M. Now Mr. M does not make and the bill was worth, let us say, 50 lakhs. Now Mr. M, in spite of repeated reminders and in spite of stretching of the credit period, is not making payment. Okay, so then what will happen to that 50 lakh bill? Now, if it is a non-recourse factoring, then the factor will present that bill to the seller, that is the big company who is the seller, and the company will have to make that payment to the factor. So the factor that is a non this is a recourse. In case of the recourse, this thing, the factor has recourse to the seller. So means it will present the bill to the in spite of all their effort. Now if the client doesn't make payment, then the factor has recourse to the seller. So the seller will make ultimately the seller will make the payment. It's called recourse. In case of a non-recourse, now the factor has no recourse to the seller. That means if a client is not making payment, then the entire loss is borne by the factor. So that is why obviously the fees that a factor charges for non-recourse financing is quite high as compared to the recourse factoring. Okay, so this is how the factoring works. If you look at the factoring principle, this is how it works. Now this is your client. Now client makes a sale to the customer. So goods are sold on credit, and customer creates an invoice. The invoice comes to the client. Now again, if you look at the yellow arrow mark, that is the invoice, the flow of the invoice. Now the invoice comes from the customer to the client, and from client it is a copy of the invoice is submitted to the factor. Okay, now the factor immediately does what is, immediately makes payment of 80% of the bill. Suppose the bill was 10 lakhs, 8 lakh payment will immediately be released by the factor to your company. Okay, now What will the factor do? Then the factor will wait until the customer makes the payment. Okay. Now once the customer makes the payment of 10 lakh rupees, now the balance amount is paid by the factor to the client. Now, for all these activities that the factor is providing the client with some kind of a shock absorber for this cash inflow and outflow, the factor will charge some amount of fees. Now, the fees will be different if it's a recourse factoring vis-a-vis if it is a non-recourse factoring. Then we talk about the commercial papers. Now, commercial papers we have discussed at some other point that commercial paper is a common form of unsecured and short-term debt. It is issued by a corporation, and which corporations can issue commercial paper? These are very highly rated organizations which can only issue commercial papers in the Indian market. Now, why they have to be highly rated? Because see, when I'm suppose I am a big company and I'm issuing commercial papers, basically meaning that I am raising finance from the market. What if I don't make the repayment on time? What if I don't honor my commitments? So then the investor, or who is a small player probably in the market, will be there will be sacrifice of wealth of the investor. So to safeguard their interest, the commercial papers are only issued by very highly rated companies, and all companies are not allowed to issue commercial paper in the market. Now you see, the commercial papers, they are typically issued for the various purposes. Now, what could be the various purposes? You can issue commercial papers and raise finance for payment of payroll, for various accounts payable, for various inventory payments, and to meet various other short-term liabilities. Now, why you cannot use commercial paper to meet your long-term liabilities? Because commercial paper typically has a maturity of less than 1 year. Okay, let us say 364 days or so. So less than 1 year. Now, if you are making the payment through commercial paper, suppose a long-term liability of 5 lakh rupees. If you are that is going to last 5 years, if you are going to make that payment from commercial papers, and then in 1 year you have to return the payment to the buyer. So what will you do then? So you'll run into problems of refinancing. So basically, it is done to meet the short-term liabilities. Now, it ranges from a few weeks to a few months, maximum being 1 year. Now, the commercial paper is usually issued. It is, for example, if the value of the commercial paper face value is 5 lakh rupees, it will be issued at a discount, and the difference between the selling price and the redemption price is it shows the return generated on that commercial paper. Okay, so and it also reflects the prevailing market interest rate. Now, having discussed the various, sources of this finance of the large corporations working capital, we will shift our attention to now let us say the differences. What are the differences between the small companies and the large companies as regards the working capital? Now you see, when we are talking about fund arrangement, now the larger companies, they will have greater assets. Okay, and these assets could be some of these assets could be used as collateral while you are arranging for funds. But imagine the case of a small and medium organization or enterprise, where if you have fund, your capital assets, basically your assets are smaller in size. Okay, and out of that, if you are going to give one or two collateral, then obviously it is going to be difficult for the small and medium company to operate. So the fund arrangement probably is easier for the one thing is the size of your assets. Second, probably could be your market share. You have a dominant market share in the marketplace, so you can arrange funds easily. You have a very high reputation in the marketplace because of by virtue of your size and by virtue of your performance, probably. So the fund arrangement could be easy. Whereas in case of, let us say, the SMEs, size of asset is low, I mean small, the market share is not dominant, you are struggling to acquire market share, your track record and your performance is, you are also still struggling at that point of time. So these kind of things make the arrangement for funds quite difficult for the SMEs, but it is quite easy for the large corporations. You can talk about the size of the debt. Now you see, if you plan to start a business, you may not have enough finance for your marketing or for your suppliers, because if you're a small farm, you have to pay installment. Okay, so you have taken a loan, so you have to pay every month installment. So you may not have the requisite capital available to go for these marketing activities or to make these interest payments and all that. This might not be the case in case of the large corporations. Similarly, if you talk about relinquishing of control, now you see the debt is a problematic thing for these small organizations. Now, if you think about the concept of equity, now you offer equity to the, let us say, a venture capitalist, or you offer equity to the banks. So basically, you are letting go of the control of your company. Whereas in case of a large corporation, they can tap the capital market and issue equity shares into the public, and the public buys it. When the public buys it, well, you are not exactly relinquishing the control as compared to the small organizations, which probably cannot tap the capital market, but they can go for this. I mean, this private placement of these equities with banks or with other venture capitalists, and that through that you have to relinquish the control of your company, because you're looking for equity capital, which is basically not a contractual obligation on your part. Okay, now you it has been seen that in the small companies, the managers or the owner, they are reluctant to retire, because their skills is what has made the SME successful, and there is a tendency to believe that the skills, if it is absent from this, probably the business will collapse. But in case of a large corporation, now various people's skill is at use, so the retirement of one key employee does not hamper the performance of the entire company as a whole. You can talk about the personal relationships. When a small organization tries to arrange for funds, then they usually approach the relatives. Okay, this is a typical scenario in India, that when you are in a small business, you typically try to arrange finance. You don't straight away go to the bank, or you don't try to tap any other, actually the marketplaces to get the finances. You first look for your personal relationships, where from you can get the funds. This is not the case in case of a big corporation, because in big corporation you'll always be professional, and you will tap into a official place for getting the funds. Now, the collateral, there is every possibility of losing asset. Now, a SME, which is having a very low asset base, for them losing an asset to a collateral, to a bank, because of the collateral, that means a lot. Okay, that might not be a big deal for a big company, though. Small companies are dependent on the resource of individuals. Okay, now that is what we were talking about, the key employee. A key employee has his set of network, his set of skill sets, his set of knowledge base. So the every individual's resources are useful for the SMEs. Maybe for a big company, this is needed. It's not that it will not be needed, but they have developed mechanism to probably capture these things in their system. And so the resource of individuals play a very critical role in case of SMEs, not so in case of big corporations. Similarly, you talk borrowing. We know the consequences of borrowing. Now, if you go for a big loan, then you take upon yourself the contractual obligations that are there. So, which will lead to your installment payments, and likewise. So the borrowing, the SMEs are very, they steer clear of the bank borrowings, because that comes with a contractual obligations. Okay, and many times these companies, they end up in installment purchases. And what happens in installment purchases is that you can no more actually if you take a mortgage on a building, and that buys a vehicle with a car loan, or the purchase of equipment with a dealer financing, is basically you are getting debt financing, but I mean, you are not free to dispose of that particular asset. Okay. Similarly, when we talk about the trade credit, in trade credit, we have just discussed that it is easier for the big companies to untwist your suppliers or your other stakeholders into giving you credit, whereas it might not be the case for a SME, which has no dominant position over the supplier. So basically, instead of getting good credit, the creditors here might untwist the small companies to accept a very poor credit standard or line of credit. So trade credit is easier for large companies and quite difficult for the SMEs. Similarly, when we talk about the bonds, now small firms do not ever consider using bonds to raise funds for long-term investment. Okay. Now, whereas the big corporations, they might not think twice for using the bond to get the working capital finance. Now, as we said, that bonds are basically loans from the public. Okay. And when you are taking a loan from a public, you are under you can take a loan from a bank, or you can take a loan from the public. So you take a loan from the bank, it is a short term bank loan, or you can talk about the bonds. Now when you're taking bonds, then the contractual obligation here is very severe, and there could be several kinds of the covenants placed on you because of that. So your working will be severely limited through the use of bonds. So small companies never think about going for bonds to finance their working capital. Now, having understood the various differences in the working capital, now we talk about the what could be the factors that affect large companies' working capital requirements. We can talk about the management of liquidity. Now, liquidity management, it will guarantee that organization has enough cash for all kinds of purposes. Now, the point is it is very frequent for a large company to pile up cash. Okay, to sit on a pile of cash and not find out alternative sources of use of cash. Okay, or that is on the one extreme. On the other extreme, because you are able to arm twist your supplier into giving you a good line of credit, and you have very good linkage with the bank, and you can arrange for finance at a very short period of time, then you care the least about the cash. Okay, because so here for the large companies, the management of liquidity is a big factor. So whether you have huge amount of more than the required amount of liquidity, then you have to manage that differently, or you are not having cash because you're confident of arranging it, so then you will have, that is also become a factor in managing your working capital. He can talk about the receivables. Now, you are providing your clients with appropriate level of flexibility or the commercial credit, while you are ensuring that the appropriate quantity of cash flows are there through various activities. Now, your company will select the credit condition to offer depending on your customer's financial strength. Now, if your customer, usually what we do is we categorize the customers into various groups: group A, group B, group C, group D, like that. So you decide, suppose group A, we will give them unlimited amount of credit, whereas in group B you say that is a credit will be available but with some constraints or some terms and conditions. Group C, is probably case to case basis. You can decide on a group C. Group D, you never give them credit. So you manage the credit accordingly. Then you talk about the inventory control. What kind of inventory policy you have? Like, do you operate with just in time, or is inventory build up a big problem for you, or shortage of inventory and the problem of stock out is a big problem for you? What kind of a control you have? Whether you are going for EOQ, whether you have ERP systems, what kind of a technique you are using. So that will also decide on your working capital needs. How are you able to manage your short term debts, and what will be the the payable, what is your relationship with your creditors, with the how are you managing your payables? That also will affect your working capital needs. So these are the various factors that are having a bearing on the large companies working capital needs. I think with this we come to the end of today's discussion on the working capital management of large corporations. Thank you.